Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Wrap, brought to you by Michigan Medicine Headlines. I'm Dan Ellman with the Department of Communication. This week, we're going to make some history. That's because we're going to chat about Michigan Medicine's history with the Department of Communication's resident historian, Kara Gavin. Before we bring Kara in, be sure you go back through the history of The Wrap and get caught up on any episodes you may have missed. You can find the most recent shows on YouTube. All of them can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any other podcast hosting platform. New episodes debut each week and are always a part of the Headlines Week in Review. That out of the way, let's look back. For the past 7 months, Headlines, and the organization as a whole, has been celebrating a major milestone in its history with a series of historical stories and social media posts. Kara, can you remind listeners why the organization is looking back on its history and what actually happened 150 years ago?
Yes, absolutely happy to. Thank you for having me on. This is our 150th year of being an academic medical center. That means having a hospital as well as a medical school. Our medical school goes back 20 more years before that. But in 1869, at the very tail end of 1869, in December, we admitted the first patient to our first hospital. So that was the kickoff date for our celebration. And before COVID struck, we were intending to sort of wrap it up by August around the ice cream social time. We're going to keep it going through as long as we can through December. Why not?
Why not? It gives people something to read, right?
Absolutely. A little distraction.
Yeah, so how did you get involved in this project and why are you so interested in Michigan medicine history?
I'm a history geek. I've also been here 21 years. And so I go back long enough to remember our celebration of the medical school's 150th in 1999 to 2000. And I arrived right as that was kicking off. And I was just absolutely amazed by the rich heritage of this place. And when it was pointed out to me that we were coming up on the 150th of the hospital, it seemed like a really natural time to stop, look back, and also flesh out our history of the hospital side of our medical center, because the medical school history had been so well traced because of that sesquicentennial, that 150th celebration of the med school back in 99, 2000. So I volunteered to do it from a communication standpoint. I reached out to Joel Howell in internal medicine and Howard Markell in the Center for the History of Medicine. Both of them are trained historians. Both of them have done amazing work to trace the history of our institution, and connected with them, connected with our wonderful historians and archivists at the Bentley Historical Library, and also with a lot of the resources that were put together for the bicentennial of the university. So there's already a lot there that I could draw from. It wasn't that I went out and did a lot of original research, but as a communicator rather than a trained historian, I'm trying to take a lot of that historical information and make it accessible to people through articles and social media.
Right, you're making it more digestible, and I think that's really important for people.
Thanks, yeah.
So now the latest in the history series that was on Headlines earlier this week outlined the origins of residents and fellows and where the term house officer came from. What did you find most interesting when researching that piece?
Well, it was interesting. It was every Thursday I've been trying to do these social media posts, and I started out thinking, well, it's July, the new residents have just started. I'll see what I can find for history of residency. And this was last Wednesday. I was kind of on deadline. I was kind of procrastinating, and I started going down the rabbit hole and looking at original sources and images. And I said, oh my gosh, there's a whole story here. The reason we call them residents is because they had to live at the hospital. We had houses for them. We eventually built a whole building for them attached to the hospital that was built in the 20s. So they actually were living here, were part of this institution 24/7 to basically provide care in addition to what the faculty physicians were already doing. So back in 1869, when we opened that hospital, there weren't any residents. There was a steward and his wife, and they lived in this converted house where these patients would come and stay, and then they would cross the DAG and go have their surgery with a faculty member on a Wednesday or a Saturday and come back and stay at the house for a few weeks. That was our hospital. But a few years later, we basically hired one of our recent graduates to live at the hospital and take care of these patients between the times when they were seeing the faculty doctors. And that was our first resident physician. Soon after, we hired our first resident surgeon. And then after that, a few more years later, we started hiring more recent graduates and calling them interns. And so these were the very newest physicians. And it was soon recognized that they needed to have a formal education beyond medical school in order to become full-fledged physicians who could practice independently. And that's where this idea that we have today of internship and residency and fellowship for subspecialists, where that all came from. And we just call them residents, we call them house officers, we call them house staff without ever thinking why. History
Right.
teaches us why.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Another thing that history teaches, you can learn how you should act or things you can do in the present by looking to the past. And one of the fascinating stories that you wrote a few months ago was the history of infectious diseases
Yes.
at Michigan Medicine and how we used to treat those. And obviously, how relevant that is today during the
Absolutely.
ongoing pandemic. So that's something that has stood out for me during this history series. What are
Yes.
some of the stories that have stood out for you?
That one was really interesting to write because it was about our infectious disease hospital and how finally people were realizing that if you kept people with infectious diseases apart from people with other conditions, you could keep those other patients from getting sick. And if you took precautions to not cross contaminate things, that you could also protect people. I've also really enjoyed delving into the history of some of our firsts as far as diversity. First medical school to accept women, except for the ones that were all women, which were few and far between and mostly back east. So we were the first major medical school to accept women. We had African American and Asian students from very early on. And this idea that we were, a place that people could come who maybe weren't what people thought physicians looked like in those days or even today. It was really important for me to find that and trace that and find pictures of them and show that these were real people. Yes, maybe they had corsets and hair put up in buns and all that, but they were doctors and
Yeah.
they were, and the nurses. The history of the nursing school is something I want to do more on as well, because this idea of nurses being a critical part of our community from the 1890s is amazing, and how we had this training school for nurses that was part of a hospital for many years until it became a full-fledged college of its own.
Yeah. Well, I think that leads perfectly into my next question. What else do you have up your sleeve that listeners and
Sure.
readers should look forward to before the year ends?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things I've wanted to do, and I'm hoping to do soon, is to look around at some of the names that we see on street signs and building signs that are names of people and look back and say, who were these people? What did they do? Why did they get something named after them? We walk down Xena Pitcher Place, or we go into a building named for someone. Why is it named that? And a lot of these go back to our early days. We also have named professorships named for people. So I want to try to look at some of those things that we take for granted,
Mhm.
and look back at it, just like we take the term resident for granted.
Right.
So take something that's every day and delve into the history of it. Also hoping to do a little bit more, maybe with some of the history more of our research on microbiology. We have an amazing claims to fame there. And I think also trying to think about maybe some things around emergency care or the way we tie into the other health sciences schools and colleges at U of M. Those are things I'm interested in, and also maybe taking a deeper dive at some of our genetics research and our role in the origins of genetics research and care, and also thinking about some of the things that go back, as far as where things were. People don't realize our first hospital was where the chemistry building is now, way down on the Diag. The medical
Hmm.
school was on the Diag. And actually, the medical school didn't really move to the Hill or the medical campus until the 50s fully. They still had students being taught down there in the 50s and 60s. So, thinking about some things like that, I'm open to suggestions. I'd love to hear from people.
Yeah. A lot to look forward to. And there's, like you said, so many things that we take for granted that have a basis in history. I wouldn't have even
Yes.
thought to think about where did Xena Pitcher Place come from, right?
Wait and see, and I'll tell you.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Now, if our listeners want to learn more about Michigan medicine history, how can
Yeah.
they go about doing so outside of staying tuned to headlines?
Sure. So we have a website, uofmhealth.org/history. So we have a timeline there, which I want to keep adding to, and then links from there to the stories that I've written. So those are easy to find, lots of pictures, but also lots of links at the bottom. So if you're really into history, scroll down to the bottom of that timeline, and you're going to find lots of links to take you even further down that same rabbit hole that I've been traveling down. But if you want to just graze and browse, every Thursday on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, I've been posting a picture or pictures and a caption, at least, if not a link to a full story, about something historical. And I actually have a goal of cataloging those and bringing them up on the website so that we have them forever and that they don't just live on Facebook. But the hashtag is MishMed150, hashtag MishMed150. And you can search that hashtag on any of those platforms and you'll find those posts.
Tremendous. Well, thank you so much, Kara. If you haven't read any of these history stories yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. They're incredibly interesting and give you a better sense of what the organization is all about today. You could find them at mmheadlines.org. That's mmheadlines.org. And while you're there, you can find other featured stories from this past week. For instance, employees shared tips on how they are planning to spend their summer safely. The Diversity Means More series returned, giving readers insight into books, podcasts, and movies that will help you become more educated on racial issues and disparities. And faculty and staff learned an inspiring patient story on one teenager who received life-saving care at Michigan Medicine during the pandemic. Find those stories and much more at mmheadlines.org. All right, it's time for the weekly trivia contest. Last week, we asked listeners, which historic event marks the celebration of Pride each year? The answer is the Stonewall Riots. Congratulations to Ellen Copeland Brown, who sent in the correct answer. Ellen, a member of the Department of Communication, will be in touch shortly to help you claim your prize. Now for this week's question. What year did the first resident hospital physician begin working at U of M? Once again, what year did the first resident hospital physician begin working at U of M? Check out this week's headline story about history to find the answer. And once you know it, send it to headlines@med.umich.edu for the chance to win a great prize. It's all the time we have for this week. Thank you so much, Kara, for joining us. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers for everything you do for patients, families, and each other. We'll see you next week.